Okay, I think we are all here today. Thanks one more time joining our conspiracy talk podcast and conspiracy talk talks on YouTube and on X, mostly on X. And today we have our guest Derek Monroe. I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and Derek is U.S. citizen, but he has a lot of connections also with Asia, mostly with Japan, and also his experience advisor in Asian and also U.S. corporations. So on this ground, I would like to speak with Derek about his experience and the role of corporations, transborder or transnational corporations in politics, basically. So, Derek, could you give few words to Polish viewers about yourself, your experience, and then we can move to some discussion.
Well, hello, dzień dobry, I have to say in the beginning. Um, I'm 56 years old, recently retired. I used to be a advisor as well as the consultant to several different corporations. I had a corporate career in Japan as well as in the US, and also have worked in capacity of a journalist, covering international affairs and foreign policy for several different international outlets, mostly in Europe, but also in the US as well, American independent media. And so it's been a really interesting trip for me so far. As far as the international capital is concerned, I did kind of live it, both worked on sites as an advisor consultant to corporations in Japan, US, Germany, Mexico as well, and have got to kind of work a lot for past 25, 30 years with a variety of different projects, mostly the automotive sector, as well as the aerospace, food manufacturing, what have you. So my experience is kind of pretty much more of a comprehensive view on how multinational corporations work and what they think and how they really kind of operate cross border to take advantage of a variety of different legislative and loopholes and take advantage of the international laws to basically to reinforce their own bottom line and make their business successful.
Mhm. Right. So before we're gonna go to the first topic, like you said, the influence of the transborder corporations on governments. I would like to ask you because when we contact firstly, you were in Poland. So could you give some also insight of your experience with Poland? Are you only going through Poland or have more?
Well, my mother was Polish, so I recently inherited a property outside of Krakow. I have a house there now, which requires a lot of work. So I'm kind of going back and forth, and so I'm kind of based in Poland. I'm quite familiar with the Polish political scene since I've covered it for several different outlets when it comes to the past 20 years in changing politics. So I'm quite familiar with the scenery, specifically on how the American North American media market looks at the issues around Eastern Europe, Poland specifically, and how to explain what's going on politically in Poland and Eastern Europe to the average American viewer or Canadian viewer, for example, which can be quite complex because, as you know, there's a lot of history and there's a lot of different context that needs to be kind of explained to really kind of derive the real information versus, let's say, good guy versus bad guy, as American media wants to portray a lot of different issues. Things specifically when changing over the politics, changing over the political parties, changing over the system, like it happened in 1989 in Eastern Europe, for example, has been kind of very mysterious for a lot of American audiences to understand the dynamics, and that's where my role comes into play.
Okay, so you are a bit Polish origin because of your
Oh
mother.
yes, yes,
Are
yes.
you speaking Polish or you
Ja,
like
można mówić trochę po polsku, ale
okay.
prefer English because it's just more native for me. So,
So
and it's, I think, yeah.
maybe let's start from your experience with Poland regarding mostly journalists. So you didn't work for some corporation, but did you work for some corporations in Poland regarding the
Uh,
transformation or?
no, I've covered Polish political scene for American media, New York Observer, out of New York, RT. I had a column in Russia, for example, for about a year, where they allowed me to kind of cover different politics with specifically when it comes to the internal politics in Poland as well. For German media as well, Telepolis had printed a lot of my stuff, Truth out of California. So it's been a kind of interesting, comprehensive view of looking at different developments in Eastern Europe and kind of explain with some kind of degree of context what's going on in those countries, where people are making the political decisions that they make, which in long term are probably not really good for them. But it's basically, looking at different political dynamics where a lot of the political messaging that comes from our country, it's being kind of implanted into the Polish, let's say, tradition or Polish context, and then kind of results in population making certain decisions, which are not long term might not be very good for them, but it's actually very profitable for our corporations, for example. So that's just how we kind of, journalists, we tend to try to expose a lot of different uh, ways of basically. I think the best way to describe would be cybernetics, where certain decisions are not being made, and how the population is supposed to behave itself one way or the other. So that's what it comes to kind of nutshell. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
one of the social cybernetics was Marian Mazur's, one of the
Oh,
Polish
absolutely.
also.
I'm very familiar with the Mazur's work, pioneering in this field. Absolutely.
Mhm. So let's start from this transformation of Poland and corporations, because you know this meeting with General Jaruzelski. So the general
Yeah.
was the general was running the martial law or the martial law time, and also was the first president. And there is a quite famous meeting with him in the late 80s with David Rockefeller, I
Rockefeller.
think.
Yep.
Yes, in New York. So, do you have some information about this meeting and the outcome of this meeting? Because we are in the conspiracy talks, of course. One
Mhm.
of the conspiracy talk in the Polish, mostly right wing audience. We are speaking that the transformation was betrayal because the communists basically sell the state corporations and
Mhm.
and basically the interests of the Polish citizens. The nomenclatura
Yeah.
after the communist times basically sold out us like normal people
Mhm.
for the big mostly US corporations, and one of it was what the so basically the idea is that we shift from one uh, semi-colonized system of
Mhm.
Moscow to semi-colonized system of the corporations, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, Poland had a really kind of bad luck to come into the so-called free world on the bottom of the new wave of neoliberal economics, which were started with Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in the UK, for example. So already the old mode, industrialized mode of making economy going and grow on the heavy industrial, in output was already obsolete by the time Poland became quote unquote part of the free world back in 1989. And one of the reasons I think that Jaruzelski met with Rockefeller, who was a sort of a kind of behind the scenes powerful guy, not not in, not so uh, dissimilar to what Soros has been doing later on, let's say a decade later, when he actually came with the Open Society Foundation, started funding a variety of different initiatives and putting money into a lot of Eastern European places to kind of make it synchronize with what the West wants to do in a lot of different parts of the world in Eastern Europe and Asia and what have you. Is that fundamentally, when the Polish economy has really kind of collapsed in the 80s, and the idea was just to basically get new loans for revival or some of the economic model to make it more competitive when Poland was to join the Western Bloc. Um, Unfortunately, what has happened at the time was the majority of different forms of productions as well as a form of industrial development that were already obsolete at a time in Western Europe as well. Plus, you have to understand one thing which is really important is that when Poland actually disengaged itself from the Comecon bloc, which was the Eastern European, RWPG bloc, they automatically got themselves cut off from the cheap natural resources, cheap gas and cheap oil, and they had to basically revert themselves into the international pricing model of the major economic inputs, such as natural resources. That right off the bat, that make Polish industry larger and incompetitive, not competitive, with regards to the more of the developed industrial world. And this is one of the reasons I think that Poland has had a shock therapy imposed upon it with people like Jeffrey Sachs, who, by the way, about 5 or 6 years ago, gave an interview, if I remember correctly, the Washington Post. He actually basically stated that this whole thing was a mistake. That when they were hired by the Polish government to the tune of $300,000 per year to be advisors to Balcerowicz government, they didn't actually. He actually admitted they didn't know what they were doing. They basically had a bunch of like principles of neoliberal economic policies to be implemented and see how it works. So Poland itself, actually, the economic transformation wasn't as bad as it happened in decade in Russia, for example, where by some economic estimates, and up to 2 million people actually lost their life prematurely because of a variety of different socioeconomic pressures and socioeconomic collapse that happened in Soviet Union at that time. So Poland itself was as bad as the situation was here in the 90s, early 90s, and the Balcerowicz wasn't as extreme as bad as it happened in Russia. So, but to better understanding the Polish transformation, one has to look also a variety of geopolitical aspects. For example, by majority of a political class, whether it's coming from core or from the so-called liberal left that wanted to kind of
Yeah.
introduce itself from point of view of the socialism of the human face. A lot of it was actually funded by CIA, by a variety of different outlets. Let's say even our laboring AFL-CIO, or even a Pope, where there were documented meetings about 28 times, if I remember correctly, William Casey, who's the head of the CIA, meeting with JP II, the Polish Pope, and each time bringing suitcases full of cash for supposedly democratization of a solidarity movement in Poland, basically to fund the
Yes.
Polish
We had
independence.
some podcasts on neoconservatism, and we were talking about the influence of this, I think the second wave of neocons and the endowment for democracy
Oh yeah,
institution, and also money that was pouring from CIA through church. So that's
yep.
why that basically, and of course the core was financed by the US, this endowment for democracy for
And yeah,
um,
yep,
freedom fighters, for humanitarian
yeah.
human rights activists, basically. But basically, in the 80s, this connection between the opposition, the one part of the opposition that was brought to the okrągły stół, so the round table. So on the
Mhm.
one side, we have Jaruzelski with this team, talking with David Rockefeller. On the other side, we have CIA financing opposition through church. We have also, and then after this transition, we have in the 90s, we have mostly US corporations, but also European corporations that are coming here and basically harvesting the Polish economy and so on. So, but not to go to this history so much, I would like to come more to the to more modern times, because we can see that those in the United States, of course, corporations are also ruling. We can see that corporations are ruling the state mostly, have their own elites and
Sure.
so on. But it's like a it's the center, the metropoly of the system, and we are living in this corporate periphery of this system. So the outcome of it. How is your view on this globalistic corporate system seeing Poland, but other Eastern European countries, and how do you see what's happening now? Because we have break of the supply chains, of course,
Hmm.
because of geopolitics, because of the war on in Eurasia
Mm.
with the proxy war between United States and Russian Federation on Ukraine. We have also now tensions on the Red Sea, so the Hormuz Strait and the Adriatic Sea, not the Adriatic, the how it's called the
Mediterranean
yes. The
or
okay, so but
Mediterranean,
basically
yeah.
through Hormuz, where all the shipments of
Mm-hmm.
oil and gas and goods from
Mm.
Asia to Europe are coming. So the one of the branch of the so-called Sea Silk Route when it was
Yeah.
happening. Okay, so how this Polish experience from the Polish topic, how it's connected with this shift and of this metropolis periphery corporate system, and how you see this break of the system now? Because we had I think a week ago World Economic Forum, and I don't
Mm.
know if you had time to watch it, but
Yeah.
I watched it, they had like they didn't, those globalists basically weren't so much happy. So they are saying that their world is breaking up because they are, of course, have this the supply chains and
Yeah.
the interest that is all around the world. How to sit in this kind of big
Oh,
landscape?
well, each individual region, when it comes to the economic development, has got its own economies. Eastern Europe is not an exception here. What happens is that each individual region, let's say Eastern Europe, the Visegrad group, or whatever you want to call it, it's basically it's got its own specific sphere of influence and sphere of economic development, which is supposed to be complementary to the larger economy where it cooperates with. For example, in the case of Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, German market is the most
Germany.
predominant. So
Yeah.
basically, the way the system is kind of designed geopolitically, for example, uh, uh, geopolitics always come hand in hand with business to the point, for example, where uh, our government and what it's the State Department of our Department of Commerce, when they go to a new, let's say, liberated area, like this, let's say it was the case with Iraq or Middle East and Syria, in case Assad government would have been deposed, they were looking at issues comprehensively from each individual economic sector and basically give kind of information to our corporate customers. You can say that what is the opportunity of investment that can be achieved in a certain area, and return on investment, and also time frame where this investment can be realized, that it can have a positive influence not only on American corporate bottom lines, but also geopolitical development as well, let's say governance and other things as well, and also changing the society into something that we want to kind of shape into the so-called post-liberal, postmodernist model, where
Mm.
people become more consumers. It's kind of interconnected to the degree where, looking in the case of Poland itself, Poland itself has really became sort of a neo-colonial market development sphere, where
Mhm.
the companies basically the country is supposed to provide, basically, first and foremost, cheap educated labor force and some raw materials, which can be complemented to the supply chains into the companies which are already manufactured for exports, let's say, to other parts of the rest of the Europe, or maybe even beyond that. But when it comes to in a nutshell, to understanding of the role of Poland and Eastern Europe and global economic chains, those markets are relatively small in overall larger socioeconomic landscape. So there are considered sort of a second or tier, uh, I would say, markets of opportunity for, say, smaller players to come in. And I'll give you an example with Greece, when there was a huge debacle when Greece was defaulting on its market on its responsibilities in order to join the eurozone, per se. There was a sort of informal agreement between U.S. government and the German government, for example, to give German government a free hand in Greece, to basically to make sure that its bailout that was produced, its banks and the French banks were being repaid first, while in this case Germany would say to back off from the Ukraine. It was about 2011, 2012 times frame, where the U.S. would basically take primary role in developing a Ukrainian market or Ukrainian geopolitical landscape to make it quote unquote more democratic. So there was basically sort of give and take where some countries are looking at it from geopolitical position of financial and economic influence versus geopolitical influence and how it complement each other. So U.S. is a very relatively light uh, footprint in the Eastern Europe for a reason, because geopolitically, maybe it's kind of a very crude thing to say. We are considering European land sort of a battlefield, common battlefields for the future conflict with Russia. Therefore, the prudent thing is for our a lot of geopolitical analysis to sort of yes, make enough investments so the Poland can and Eastern European countries can develop themselves as some kind of viable democracies, but don't put too much money in the area because quite possible it's going to be battlefield in the future. And what happens in the battlefield, everything gets damaged and destroyed. Therefore, it's not a really kind of sound investment for unless you're in business of rebuilding, which is also another sphere that's really kind of be opening up opportunistically for our corporations. Let's say Blackstone, making a huge agreement with J.P. Morgan Chase to sort of fund this new economic development bank as a sort of a platform for rebuilding Ukraine after the war is over. This is just relatively new development past 6 months, for example, that's been going on here, and nobody really writes about this. So there's a lot of different. Yeah.
Yes, let's stop for a second because you're pointing out many topics that I have many questions now. So, but
Sure.
Finishing what you said before, this the system of corporation and the connection with the Department of State and the Department of Commerce of United States. So of course,
Yeah.
the best book is, I think, for this is the Confession of Economic Hitman.
Yes.
Of
Absolutely. It's absolutely true. Yeah.
We have also in Polish
Yeah.
here. So
Yeah.
of course, I think there's
Yep.
there's a movie, so it's always this is the beginning.
Yep.
To understand what we are talking about is
Yep.
this. So it's,
Yep. That's a fantastic book. Absolutely. Yeah.
so
That's
yeah. So yeah. So you moved from explaining how the United States is working with corporations and how it's looking for to other regions. Towards how the Eastern Europe is perceived by globalist elites, we can say, or US elites that are running now United States, of course, because we are speaking about Americans, United States, but from precisely we are speaking of liberal interventionists, neocons, and the globalized elite that were the hijacked basically the interest of United States to some globalistic agenda, basically to corporations, to others. Yeah.
Well, this predominant interest in the region after the 1989 changeover has been rekindled again with George W. Bush administration when they went around many different countries to put up the so-called coalition of the willing, many countries to contribute military to go into Iraq and basically occupy the country. And that's why this whole new phase was coined of the so-called New Europe versus the old Europe, which is sort of like a good cop versus bad cop situation, where the old Europe was kind of schismatic, not longer interested in dynamic development of its economies. They're too comfortable for their own good. Where the hungry new Europeans in Eastern Europe are able to pick up the mantle and kind of expand the geopolitical thirst for new development, for this new way of doing things from a more dynamic, aggressive approach. And this was supposed to be spearheaded by countries like Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic, what have you. So this was the dynamics that kind of came into place. However, when it comes to the social, economic, and geopolitical balance sheet when it comes to Eastern European countries, yes, we see it sort of a growing as a sort of experiment where we want those countries to somewhat succeed to a degree where the new phase of new generation of consumers can be brought in and consume our products and sort of like kind of used to the Western lifestyle. But also uh, on the other end, there's a also quiet recognizance where if European continent needs an economic base for manufacturing, therefore Eastern Europe would have to be the most suitable for it because of the low cost of production, whether it's utilizing labor or utilizing cheap resources, what have you. So in the way, so there's always a give and take where you guys are sort of a most like a Latin American style kind of economic base where yes, we can, you guys can get rich and you can develop your own, aspirations for better living and better standard of living, what have you. But on the other hand, don't forget that you're here to provide certain services to the old, US or European economic model, which has to rely on your cheap labor. So this is always gonna give and take in a way, I think, which is sort of very neo-colonial in its own aspect. But on the other hand, it creates a variety of different competing resources and competing centers for power. Where, for example, the situation in Poland right now with the KO and peace, where obviously what's going on in the political sphere, let's say with the taking over TV stations and just very aggressive uh, approach to taking power by KO and Tusk, might violate Polish constitution, but we're no longer interested in rule of law. We're interested in basically in getting certain part of our elites getting together with the Polish elites in order to make some kind of good working relationship, so we can get first of all what we want out of the region, number one thing, and whatever is left over, then Polish people have to be satisfied with that. Unfortunately, it's a sort of very neoliberal kind of setup, colonial setup, that it's kind of perpetuating itself from generation to generation. And the original promise of catching up with the West, let's say on spheres such as life
Sorry,
expectancy,
the
medical
connection,
care,
the connection is a bit, the connection is
salaries, or it's always
breaking.
like behind it.
The connection is a bit breaking. I think we're gonna finish like in 5 minutes. So basically, what you're saying, it's the same like Morawiecki was saying some years ago,
Sure.
that we are like a foreign-owned country, because he said it like in public television that Poland is a foreign-owned country. So basically, and what you said, that on one hand, of course, cheap labor and market for the U.S. corporations and so on to have new clients for the global interests, but on the other hand, we are seen as a war zone. So because Poland have a long history to being a war zone between East and West, of course, because of the flat terrain and so on.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
because we're gonna finish, not to have a so much longer discussion, but like we have like 4 minutes. Could you give your insight, your view? What's going to happen regarding Ukraine and Poland from your perspective? Because we can see that, of course, Ukraine, the Western elites don't want Ukraine in NATO. Also, the European and United States. But now we are signing bilateral agreements for security for Ukraine. So United Kingdom, France, Macron was saying about this, and of course Poland, because Poland, of course, is, and of course in this bilateral agreements. Poland as the closest country, and of course Poland as we're gonna give the persons for the next maybe war with Russia after some appeasement or whatever, and UK and France only maybe supply us with weapons. So could you like sum up the Ukraine issue in this corporation
Yeah.
framework?
Well, as long as the Poland is member of the EU and NATO, then it's Polish government's initiative or bilateral relations with U.S. of Ukraine are somewhat limited, because whatever decisions they are going to make, let's say transfer weapons, military technologies, or even let's say provision of volunteers or military trainers to the Ukrainian side, will always be under the auspices of NATO, what the NATO alliance can actually allow to each individual member what to do. However, that has been a very strong talk recently of Poland leaving the Eurozone, or in case, for example, be a situation where there would be some kind of more of a autarkic view on or Poland providing more material to Ukraine, can indirectly become a party of the military conflict as well. So it's a sort of a kind of balancing act, which which Polish government has to be aware of, that yes, their autonomy and sovereignty in this case is severely limited by the limitation of the NATO alliance. And but as the big news happened last week, where the British generals and also uh, Rasmussen, who's the head of the NATO, stated that NATO is going to be going into major war with Russia in the next 20 years. That already kind of prepares you the scenery for what the Poland is going to be preparing itself for. And I think right now those preparations are very much active. That's what's going on in Rzeszów, which has the largest, biggest military units, so one of the largest in the world, where a lot of transshipments of weapons and military technologies are taking place right now, completely out of the legal jurisdiction of the Polish government. This is an extraordinary situation where the Polish government has absolutely no say, no kind of whatsoever about what's being transported, what's happening there.
Yeah,
And it's
there was
brought
a
by
quite a,
our government many
there
times.
was quite a big
About
scandal in last year that the Polish authorities and the Polish security service didn't know about some transport of Ukraine officials through Jesionka
yeah,
airport in Rzeszów. And I was in Rzeszów, I think in
yeah,
late August last year for a few days. And of course, we can I had have this impression that I'm kind of in Saigon because there were I was going to
yeah,
for the old town, and there were like young Polish beautiful young women and some looking for some US soldier with a lot of money.
mm,
So first of all, this kind of I had
yeah.
this kind of scene like from Full Metal Jacket.
Well,
So it was quite funny, and
yeah,
also I saw a lot of officials and also security agents eating with restaurants. So
mm,
we can see that Rzeszów now is kind of a city that is, like you said, out of
yeah,
jurisdiction of Poland. Okay, so Derek,
yeah. De
we have
facto, this is
yes, wrap
yeah.
it up.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a story is always developing, and I'm close to the region.